Hey, welcome to the third session today, the European Green Deal. Without doubt, this is one of the most hotly debated and important topics that we can talk about nowadays. And if you had a chance to listen to the words of welcome of President Hoyer, the importance of the topic is, I think, crystal clear, but also the uh, various challenges that we will have to face on the way on implementing the Green Deal are pretty clear. What is also clear, and probably more clear to the younger generation than to people that are a little bit older, is that there is no alternative to this Green Deal. For this discussion, I welcome a range of magnificent experts, I have to say. Allow me to start by order of alphabet. Professor Christian Kallis from the Free University Berlin. Hello. Sabine Nallinger, Managing Director of the Stiftung 2 Degrees. Dr. Carsten Sach, Director General in the German Federal Ministry for the Environment. I know the title is much longer, and I would be used to that much more in Vienna than in Berlin. But for the sake of time, I've shortened it. And last but not least, my dear colleague Gabi Umbach from the EUI in Florence. Just a couple of general remarks. We will have relatively short statements by the panelists. We want to devote as much time as possible to the Q&A session. Technically, I'm in the hands of our colleagues at the IEP. I also welcome our moderator for the dialogue, for the chat dialogue, Yvonne Braun. Please don't forget to ask and post your questions on this chat room, and we will then select them and ask and direct them to the respective speaker. Allow me to do a very, very short introduction into our session. I think it is very important to put the question about the viability of the Green Deal and how to go forward also a bit in context. And this is a context that is probably a little bit biased from my point of view, of course. I do think what we are witnessing currently in the European Union is a kind of almost perfect storm. So on the one hand, you have an internationally increasingly erratically acting US presidency. We have upcoming elections that, no matter how they end, have a considerable potential to cause upheaval in the US. We have a Europe that for several years now sees the emergence of populist governments that enjoy European financial support but don't really play by the rules, and also question the very raison d'etre of the European Union, a message that in some parts is very well received by the respective electorates. Last but not least, I do think we see a very lackluster European Union. Some of you might have seen the article in The Guardian today about the study of the European Council on Foreign Relations. A lackluster European Union that is occupied in the past years with a lot of navel gazing instead of thinking about bold steps forward. And if you now add Brexit and the severe economic effects of COVID-19, the magnitude of the challenge becomes really visible. I hear voices growing louder and louder questioning the European Union per se, also given its rather modest performance in the past month, at least in the public perception. Now, in this context, we discussed the European Green Deal. Is it the bold step forward that Europe undoubtedly needs? Is the current crisis, an opportunity? If we manage to combine the necessary recovery with deep structural reforms in our industry, in our transport and production sectors. Is this a chance, or will we see something completely different? My personal fear is that Europe, our environments, will look pretty much the same as they did before the crisis. And this would not be only a missed opportunity. I think this is a make or break question. Again, I think we all agree that there is no alternative to a radical change in the European environmental policy, and also, of course, in the national policies. Like always, the devil is in the detail. We might agree on the objective, but not on the way forward. And in such situations, I always find it very useful if one thinks a little bit in terms of extreme ends on a spectrum of possibilities. And I would also like to ask you to think a little bit and give us your assessment. Which of those extremes are a little bit closer to reality? Number one scenario is, of course, imagine that, it would be wonderful. The Green Deal and the recovery plan are coupled. We achieve a substantial turn around in Europe's environmental policy. What does this actually mean? What does it mean also in terms of our relations to those neighbors that supply us with fossil fuels? How much do we need to reach out as Europe, and not just do it as Europe, reaching our objectives, but what are the repercussions if we are reaching those objectives with the kind of very bold step forward? Number two, imagine no coupling can be achieved. The Green Deal remains, like so many announcements of the European Union, a kind of noble goal. That contributes to further frustration of the citizens. Yeah? And the recovery plan concentrates on traditional industrial policies. What I called beforehand my biggest fear, that everything remains the same after the crisis as it has been before. And in this respect, I would also like to ask you and hear your assessment, which of those directions, and will not be one of the extremes, you think more likely. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. And I'd love to hand over to our first panelist, Christian Kallis. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for having me. I would like to share some ideas I developed as a member of the Sachverständigenrat für Umweltfragen, the German Advisory Council on the Environment, advising the German government. I prepared a chapter on the European Green Deal and on the future of European environmental policy, and we addressed some of these questions that are part of the challenges to the German presidency. From my point of view, the European Green Deal is a great chance. It should be now a green flag for faster progress. In Germany and in the European Union, politicians must now demonstrate that they are capable of effective action in the face of enormous environmental and, with regard to the corona pandemic, economic challenges. There can be no doubt that European environmental policy has achieved a great deal. The European Union is and remains still an important driver of environmental law and policy. Nevertheless, the necessary fundamental strategic decisions have not yet been taken to the extent called for. More than half of the European sustainability targets for 2020 are likely to be missed. More than half. Finally, final energy consumption, for example, and emissions from transport and agriculture continue to increase, and the loss of biodiversity is advancing. Environmental progress has also slowed down in key areas such as greenhouse gas emissions, waste streams, and energy efficiency. One of the reasons for this is that there is an implementation and enforcement deficit in European environmental policy at the level of the European Union itself, but also at the level of the member states. In addition, and maybe you can share the next slide now, in addition, can you share, thanks, the next slide, thank you very much. In addition, despite the binding European mandate under Article 11, and this is what you see here, the so-called integration clause, environmental and climate protection concerns are still insufficiently integrated into key policy areas such as agricultural, transport, economic and infrastructure policy. Moreover, ongoing environmental problems in many areas require fundamental change. This includes energy supply and mobility, agriculture, and the use of finite resources. At the same time, the mandate given in Article 11, which is a great chance for the integration of environmental concerns into other policy sectors, must be put into effect. The need for integration, I mean, this Article 11, from my point of view, is a kind of sleeping beauty, I would say. We never really exploited the potential in this article. And with the European Green Deal, I see a great chance. Because the need for integration and adaptation is particularly great in the agricultural, fishery, and transport sectors. In line with the European Green Deal, all measures in these areas must be consistently focused on environmental sustainability in order to significantly reduce negative impacts on health, biodiversity, air, water, and soil. To this end, the planned European climate law should set out an ambitious and transparent reduction pathway. In my view, the AIDS Environmental Action Program, which is to be decided under the German presidency, could act as a monitoring framework for the implementation of the European Green Deal, because the European Green Deal is still too abstract. We need more concrete measures, and these could be part of the AIDS Environmental Action Program. The European Union has committed itself, moreover, to achieving the United Nations Sustainability Goals by 2030. These goals should be integrated in the so-called European semester, being part of the European Monetary and Economic Union, as an instrument already in place for strengthening environmental protection and sustainability. But what is really decisive under Article 11 is ongoing monitoring of the implementation of the strategies, and of the European Green Deal, the AIDS Environmental Action Program, and so on. This monitoring is indispensable to the successful implementation of the climate law, I mentioned already, provided for in the European Green Deal, but as well for the sustainability strategy and the AIDS Environmental Action Program. This must be ensured by appropriate institutional arrangements, such as environmental officers in the Director Generals of the Commissions, and another rather far-reaching proposal, a reformed European Economic and Social Committee. In order to better embed the issues of sustainability and climate protection on an institutional level, one could indeed think about giving the European Economic and Social Committee a new role by becoming the watchdog of the implementation of a European sustainability strategy. This institution already today advises the European Council, the European Commission, and the European Parliament on economic and social matters. Since many economic and social development issues can no longer be dealt with today without taking environmental challenges into account, in line with Article 11, maybe we can go to the next slide right now, in line with Article 11, this institution could ensure the implementation of these three pillars: European Green Deal, implementation of the Agenda 2030, and in general, the enforcement of environmental policy, because we have, as I mentioned, an enforcement gap, a gap between promise and delivery, a gap between the law in the books and the law in practice. So it's the new kind of, let's say, European Sustainability Committee could work towards the observance and implementation of the decided European sustainability strategy and plans like the Green Deal, and its implementation by the AIDS Environmental Action Program, as well as the European Climate Protection Law. To this end, this Sustainability Committee, the reformed European Economic and Social Committee, would need to be given greater political authority during the decision-making process. As an ultima ratio, for example, the committee should have the power to stop the decision-making process for a limited time, let's say 3 months, if there are serious doubts that legislation is not in line with the the Green Deal, the AIDS Environmental Action Program, or the European Climate Protection Framework Law. Now, some last 4 topics, and maybe you can come to the next slide with regard to the link between European Green Deal and recovery plan. the European Green Deal can be interconnected and can be with the European Recovery Strategy. And this has to be done under Article 11. I mean, this is really even a legal expectation of the treaties. It's a legal responsibility of the German presidency and the European Union, European institutions. So a massive renovation wave of our buildings and infrastructure and a more circular economy bringing local jobs could be achieved. Rolling out renewable energy projects should be part of the program, and these are at the center of linking European Green Deal and recovery plan. Cleaner transport and logistic as well could be part, and a strengthening of the Just Transition Fund, sorry, to support reskilling, helping business create new economic opportunities, to support innovation could be a chance when we now have these billions of euros. They should be used, these euros should be used in order to support the program of the European Green Deal and the AIDS Environmental Action Program. And but this needs, and it was mentioned in your introductory words, Johannes Pollack, that we have to deliver on our promises, and this is decisive in order indeed to convince citizens that the European Union is capable of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kallis. That was indeed a lot of food for thought. I would very much like to pass on to Sabine Neilinger to share her thoughts with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pollack, for the kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this timely roundtable on green recovery and the European Green Deal, just 1 week before the beginning of the German EU presidency. I'm thankful to share my view as a managing director of Foundation 2 Degrees, and I will approach today's topics from a, I would say, business perspective based on my daily work with German companies across all sectors. And I would like to contribute just 2 points to this first round of interventions. And I can say, despite the perfect storm, as you have called it, Mr. Pollack, I do remain optimistic as in your first scenario. Let me explain why. My first point is our economy truly can recover better if we build on the momentum in the private sector and manage it to put the European Green Deal at the heart of our recovery efforts. This point sounds obvious. Ursula von der Leyen and Commissioner Timmermans have presented a very ambitious roadmap that has the potential to make the Green Deal a driver for innovation, investments, and for jobs. From discussion with our funding companies, which come from all over the sectors in the economy, just building energy production, mobility, and so on, I can tell you the majority of companies does see the approach of the EU Commission as an opportunity to emerge from the crisis in a stronger, more sustainable way, as an opportunity to make the European economy more modern and more internationally more competitive. And yet this point is not obvious at all. Now it all depends on ambitious, bold and swift implementation. The devil is in the detail, as you say, Mr. Pollack, and we have to make sure that the key elements of the Green Deal set the right framework condition to steer and support the private sector in this moment of crisis, recovery and transition. Carsten will surely address some of these elements in more detail, but I can tell you that German companies are eager to make the different elements of the Green Deal a success, but it's on the industry strategy, the circular economy strategy, the renovation wave, or even the European climate law. As an example, to illustrate this willingness, I would like to refer to a joint business statement of nearly 70 companies calling for a climate stimulus program, which we have initiated at the occasion of the Petersburg Climate Dialogue in April this year. And my second and last point is a condition so that we can stay optimistic. Obviously, there is a scientific need for raising the ambition of the European NDC. But to make a more ambitious NDC a reality, we have to have a more honest and engaging dialogue with the private sector, I would say, and especially with the energy-intensive industries. So that is that we have to say we need to talk about setting the right goals and putting the right measures in place. Our aim must to achieve our climate goals and put European businesses in a position to invest and use climate protection as a driver for innovation. Climate protection needs long-term planning, and European businesses need planning security. We can hear it all over the companies who tell us the most important thing is the planning security. So the sector of the energy intensive industry illustrates this challenge very well. Industry is an important pillar of our prosperity, but it is under strong international competitive pressure. At the same time, industry is also a key sector for achieving the climate protection goals. This requires a transformation of industrial processes and products that requires massive investments. So this is a very big challenge for companies, especially against the background of the current crisis situation. And my impression is large parts of the industry continue to pursue ambitious climate protection goals. So you have already made strategic decisions and initiated investments, but political support is now all the more needed to enable industry to achieve its climate targets. With the participation of around about 2 companies, energy intensive companies, we have drawn up a position paper with 3 recommendations. And the first recommendation is we need an investment program for low carbon breakthrough technologies in industry through tax incentive, risk minimization through carbon contracts for differences. And secondly, we should make Germany and the EU world leaders in low carbon industrial products and manufacturing technologies by creating lead markets, for example, by introducing a quota for low carbon industry products in key industries or so. And the third point is we need to create a sufficient and reliable supply of renewable energies at internationally competitive prices. It is particularly important to take into account the growing demand for electricity so that the 65% target can be achieved by 2030. So finally, let me conclude by saying, as I said initially, I do remain optimistic as in your scenario number 1. Despite the tremendous economic challenges of the corona pandemic, a stronger and a more sustainable economy recovery is possible. And companies in Germany are ready to work with the German EU presidency to embrace these opportunities. As Foundation 2 Degrees, we will actively contribute to deepening and strengthening the dialogue with the private sector during this important time for Europe. Now, thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Oh, no. This is going to be the gesture of the century. Thank you for your input, Mrs. Nallinger. That, of course, triggers immediately also a lot of questions. Not the least of it is the role of the state in going forward by providing massive investments into research and development, by providing massive investments into the transfer to sustainable energy and electricity production. At the same time, you're emphasizing the role of private companies, of course. At the same time, we see the state coming back also through subsidies now paid out due to the COVID crisis. So we also need to achieve or think about the balance that we need to achieve here. And I also do think, in addition to that, it's very important that we don't lose sight that we are not running into the danger of exporting energy-intensive industry into regions where we have much less concern about the environment, so to say. I do think parts of these questions will also be taken up. Our next speaker, Dr. Carsten Sach. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me. The first point I would like to make is the discussion we're having today is fundamentally different than the one we had in 2008, 2009. And that even the crisis being bigger and deeper. That shows that we have made intellectual and policy progress. Why is it different? Probably two main reasons. First, a clear commitment of the European Union to greenhouse gas or climate neutrality by 2050, which is a communication and a clear target which business and member countries understand. And secondly, we were lucky that we had a European Green Deal, which is much more than just a target spelled out earlier on. And that was in a time where Europe was already in crisis, but it was seen as the new European growth model. Christian, I would like to correct you on one point. You said from today, CO2 emissions in Europe are still rising. That is true until 2017. We had it. Since 2018, it's declining. Not at the speed we are having, but I'm making the point that after we got a clear-cut policy decision in implementing Paris, in that field of environment policy, we saw progress. And others, where we were not that clear-cut, we didn't see that progress. So overall, I agree with what you were saying, but I had just quite some public calls and requests on that question, and I looked very closely into the matter. My third point is probably money is not enough. On one hand, we need to combine the decisions on the recovery plan and the multi-annual financial framework, hopefully to be decided the basic design already on 17th and 18th of July with climate policy and environmental policy. I think we need to have a hook which gives us a North Star of policy direction. But having said that, we were not that bad, and I think Christian alluded to that. If I look at all the legal draft laws and legal proposals, when we go to the weed, the operationalization is not there yet, and we need to get better. Am I pessimistic on that one? No, because I think through taxonomy and others, we made huge progress last year. But it is partly a problem that we cannot take that as decided European law yet, because we are just in the middle of the process of law making there. But it is not just money. It's important that we have that spent in a future-oriented way, but we then need to have also a reform phase. which means clear pricing signals, and all the points Christian mentioned are important ones, that we also have a legal framework which supports that and which supports private business as well. And I would share what Christian said. We don't want to double with the AIDS Environmental Action Program. What we have put forward in a more coherent and more integrative way in the European Green Deal, it's more having clear indicators and a monitoring framework. Unfortunately, we cannot decide on that important topic. I was part of the discussion on the first Environmental Action Program because the Commission will only come forward just in the fourth quarter, but we will start it, and we just discussed with my minister and the Portuguese minister that they will then take the baton and driving it forward. Last point, Sabine's points of having a clear investment program, also, for example, carbon-free quota of steel, the renewables points are just what to support. And finally, we should not be blue-eyed. I think it is important that we discuss on how we make a cooperation offer to countries outside Europe, but if that is not taken, there will be instruments where we price externalities in a way which protects our industry. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sach. That's a very informed perspective from the German ministry you brought in. Happy now to give the floor to Gabi Umbach, and Gabi will also try to sow a little bit of discord amongst us, just for the sake of discussion, I hope. Gabi, please.
Let's see, I do my best, yet with an integrative direction, to be honest. I wanted to round up the discussion, the first round of discussion, with 3 elements that I think are worth having in mind and focusing on when we talk about the Green Deal and its current position vis-a-vis the recovery plan and EU climate action. And my points target the focus on climate action that is necessary, trade-offs between the instruments and the developments, and the participatory approach. So first, the focus on EU climate action and why this is an essential element to be kept in the Green Deal and in the recovery plan. And here I wanted to add a bit of context to help us zoom out. So we're talking, normatively, we're talking about a global common good and the basis for our livelihoods. And this is not just a nice to have add-on to any sort of environmental policy, it's intrinsically saving our livelihood on Earth. So we do have an obligation to engage in a future-oriented policy. The Green Deal, and there I'm very much with Mr. Sach, your assessment that the Green Deal in December 2019 offered us a tremendous anchor and currently is not at all a hurdle to our recovery. So normatively, climate policy needs to be at the forefront because we do have a global obligation to act. Number 2, deviating from this focus will jeopardize the EU's overall role in global governance. This role is nurtured by the position in development aid, in development policy, in trade, and in climate change. Having had a clear climate focus and actorship has benefited the European Union a lot in terms of global governance, credibility, trust, coherence, and everything that we would combine with global actorness is jeopardized if we deviate from the strong climate focus in the Green Deal. And last but not least, if we jeopardize this position, we will have geopolitical problems, not only in global climate governance, but across the board. We do have the US in terms of emitters. We do have China, the US, the European Union, and Russia as those that
Gabi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You were just gone for a couple of seconds.
I can, and I hope that you can. through.
Perfect now.
Sorry for that. I had.
Can you hear me back?
Yes, please continue.
Super, perfect. So we will have geopolitical issues, and not just in climate change. Climate change needs to be the focus also because environmental policy making over the past 20 years led us to this direction. So if we deviate in terms of climate action, we will not have much to back our economic transformation and development. Second point, and now I'm a bit quicker, sorry for the delay, trade-offs. All of the previous contributors alluded to that. We will need to discuss trade-offs in between the different elements and in between the different instruments. This will span over the finances. We have issues if we have a public-private funding scheme and financing basis for a Green Deal. It has potential. It is the only way forward, but trade-offs for these financial means will need to be discussed. Trade-offs will also be there in securing supply competitiveness versus transformation. And this discussion needs to be held in a transparent and in a very open way so that decisions can be taken based on these discussions. We will have trade-offs for governance. The climate law as it currently is rather tends towards the open method of coordination, what we saw in the European semester with the broad economic policy guidelines, the employment strategy, and it doesn't really give the European Union teeth to bite in case of non-compliance of member states. So the governance questions, also with the delegated acts, Christian, you will elaborate in the discussion, I assume, on that. It's a delicate path. So this needs to be discussed and trade-offs need to be faced. One strongest trade-off that I want to underline, and from a societal point of view that is important to face, is in between action and non-action. And here intergenerational equity comes in. If we take the sustainability floor of the Green Deal seriously, we will need to focus more on the justification of no action in the Green Deal discussions. Whenever, as in March, it happened in March, countries, members of the executives come up and ask for exemptions from the emissions trading scheme, exemptions from the Green Deal, deviations from the Green Deal. I suggest to have an intergenerational impact assessment in the Council attached to the legislation, so that those member states need to justify against the backdrop of evidence presented why they decide not to act. Because here future generations' ability to fulfill their need come in, and we need to take it seriously if we want to not only wake up the sleeping beauty of environmental and climate action mainstreaming, but sustainability mainstreaming as is there already in the treaties. My last point, participation. The Green Deal as it stands now breathes the ideas of participation. It's public-private co-financing elements. It's the climate pact that is important. So it genetically, from its policy ID, it is based on participation. We need to embrace that because evidence-informed policy making that we will need to assemble all the necessary knowledge for policy reform, financial systems reform, require that. We will need to have a hierarchy of different forms of participation, and I will leave that to the discussion because I'm sure that this will come in, and we have different elements here. We do have the idea of the cooperation across value chains that is very important. For example, we had that in the battery, in the Plastic Alliance era, but also in the farm to fork strategy are these elements. We do have room for citizen science coming in. Biodiversity is something that is here important, but we also have the room for communities of practice. That is something that came up some 5-6 years ago, and that is very much coming from the corporate sector to inform those that are working on particular projects, on particular areas, coming together and discussing the way forward and the necessary steps. It can lead us to designed coupling, where we could discuss citizens' assemblies attached to EP committees, for example, to the ENVI committee when we discuss really important elements of reform. But this is also something that we need to take into consideration when we discuss the Green Deal as such. In terms of your initial questions, you have assembled a group of practitioners that for over decades work on environmental policy, and it would be a wonder for me if we weren't optimistic, because we have seen the mobilizing element that a community of practice in climate change and environmental policy is making. So I would say that if we manage to be clear about the trade-offs and to integrate those that finance and also the ideas of those that finance and those that implement, I would say there is no alternative. So we indeed have a Tina moment here, and the Green Deal will lead the way forward, I do assume, for the future. Johannes, over to you. And sorry for the technical hiccup.
Thank you very much, Gabi. Before I hand over to Yvonne to manage our chat, I would also like very much to raise a question to all of you that Ian Beck has just posted. And Ian, sorry, I cannot respond to your chat. That is clearly beyond my technical means. But it makes a very important point. You know, when we talk about the Green Deal, we are talking about many, many years to come in the future with significant investments. Currently, we are having an enormous need for investments to ease the effects of the pandemic. That means we need an immediate stimulus now to kickstart the economy. That means consumer spending, and consumers might spend it on things that are probably quite high energy intensive in production and probably not environmentally sustainable. So how can this be reconciled? So if any one of you wants to take up this question, I would be very thankful. Yvonne, I'm handing over to you for the moderation of the chat.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, we have a first question by Tatjana Kuhn, directed to Dr. Carsten Sach. Maybe Tatjana, please repeat your question to the audience. Thank you.
Yes, I can repeat it, of course. So when I was listening to you, especially Dr. Sach, I started thinking about the costs of the Green Deal and the circular economy and renewable energy that you were speaking about. And I was wondering how the EU wants to make sure that the externalities are not outsourced to poorer countries where we don't have, or they don't have, environmental laws as the EU does. And I think Johannes Pollack already mentioned this point.
Thank you for the question. What is cost is my first point, and then I get concrete, because we are bearing quite a lot of cost in recovering from the pandemic. And that is a cost to our budget. And for me, the main question is, what will future markets be? And therefore, I see it as an investment, and it is well spent money if we develop into future markets. That having said, you're absolutely right that there might be a price differential in a phase to get started. And I already hinted at that in my intervention. I'm not too big a fan of starting directly with border carbon adjustments. So the topic, I think, is a good one. And that's why I choose a wording which we, for example, put forward toward China. We want to just have a dialogue and want to have an exchange that we have comparable environmental standards with countries in order to pursue cooperation. The same goes when we talk about our cooperation with Northern Africa. But at the other side, I'm always arguing that there is a point which that we are willing to act if that offer is not taken on board. Second one, there are lots of regulations which would have the same impact on importers of products into our. So it's a trade logic behind it that we just defining through internal legislation, you level playing field for things who are coming in. So then it comes back to issues: are there waste exports, or are there some other issues? They are in. So just I don't diminish that, but I think there are ways around it. And if we dare to be strong on these issues, not blue-eyed, strong on that one, I think we, as Gabi Umba said, we are strong on something where we can be a powerful international region. Otherwise, we would be just bullied around by people who don't share that opinion, and we might have changes. Of course, China's recovery is not all about green, and we have new coal-fired power plants. On the other hand, we see that there's huge overcapacities, and that is a burden on their balance sheet. So it's not that it is just an issue which is just one way. On that, I'm aware that that is an important topic for our presidency. I could be more precise if I would take Christian's role as a professor, but so I think you got some hints of what I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Can I come in on that? And on Ian?
Go ahead, Gabi.
Yeah, super. Thank you very much. Absolutely, and we shouldn't underestimate the pull effect that the mere idea of the carbon border adjustment mechanism had. We have seen in the discussion already players from Russia tending towards interesting idea. How can we work on this together?
Gabi, we lost your audio again. Sorry. Sorry, we cannot hear you. Maybe we can postpone your input a little bit, Yvonne. Any further questions from the chat room?
The one question I see in the chat is of Mr. Ian Beck. I think Mrs. Umbach wanted to say something regarding this. I don't know.
I'm so sorry. Am I back?
Yes.
I thought,
Gabi.
Mr. Sach, I thought you were enthusiastic, but it was just my mic. So we shouldn't underestimate the mere mentioning of the carbon adjustment, the carbon border adjustment mechanism had a pull effect also in global climate governance, where we start discussing these elements, and that could lead to a move towards European standards, a certain Europeanization.
Gabi, you are gone again. I'm sorry.
We got your message already.
We got your message. Yvonne.
I just can't believe it. Am I back? Yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm brief and leave time for the others. Ian, I do also think that the European Commission needs to push forward and
Maybe
continue with the others.
Thank you, Gabi. Since time is of the essence, I don't see any immediate chats. Maybe any of you of the panelists wants to, and you can see that now in the chat also, answer Ian Beck from the LSE about this question about the immediate financial stimulus needed and the sustainability objectives that we are facing. I would very much like to give all the panelists 2 minutes, 3 minutes for a final statement. We have to come to an end already. I would go the other way around now. Gabi, does your mic work now?
I have no idea.
It does. Wonderful.
Goodness sake. Good. So, Lars, I hope that you heard my points. As a sum up, take a societal effort to bring this. In some, I agree, there is no alternative to that globally. We should see the European Union in context in global climate governance, and we should accept that participation is the way to delivery, and this Green Deal is not an antagonist arena, that there is not pro and cons, that this is something that business and politics and society need to manage to implement together.
Thank you, Gavi. Mr. Sach, please tell us that the German presidency will solve all those issues.
I think just on the issue of Ian Beck, I think that's a fair point. It is sometimes very difficult to have direct economic impact now. Therefore, probably you need to undertake, and we did it on hydrogen, for example. You do direct investments, but you also have commitments for a longer time to alter. So it is just you allow for a certain quite traditional investment in the beginning, but with the commitment of altering it over time. So there are some mechanisms to doing it, but I see the tension. And if you look at our stimulus package and what we see in it, the big fight in Germany was about whether we have a scrappage premium or sales incentives for just conventional cars, and we were at the forefront fighting it. Still, there is incentives for the automotive industry in. So, but if they just would sell them with a big rebate, but that's not where we should put public money on. So, is there any indirect support for the automotive industry? Certainly there is. We are supporting them in just speeding up the move towards electric mobility. So that's on that one. Will we solve all of the problems? I don't know yet. We have, I think the impact assessment for raising new climate targets, which are due in September, will be important. I think we were very clear through our Chancellor that we support these kind of commitments, and we have committed to solving that. The timeline is very short, so we're doing our best. We front load the discussion, but we can only front load the discussion on preliminary findings which are our own while waiting for the official documents. So it's a challenge, but that's why it is that important that we get the connections built in rather generic, high-level heads of state terms in the European Council in July, and then have some kind of implementation agenda thereafter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sach. Mrs. Nallinger, please.
Yeah, I think one point is really important, and Mrs. Umbach was just talking about it, and it's about the potential differences between action and non-action. Let me re-emphasize this on earlier point of mine. The outlook of European recovery will depend on political leadership and the capacity to renew the planning and investment security for the private sector. So, and to provide this much needed planning security means to set the right incentives during the upcoming negotiations on the next EU budget, the right climate safeguards for provision of recovery. So in other words, the private sector is on board for a green recovery, but it is asking for a bold signal that European leaders are serious about making it a reality. The EU Council meetings in July, in October, and in December this year are a good opportunity to do this. Thank you very much for the invitation and for our discussion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nallinger. Last but not least, Christian Kallis, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, in previous discussions today in this conference was mentioned the white paper on the future of Europe of the Juncker Commission. And this addressed with some of the scenarios, some challenges on the future of the European Union. One is this gap between promise and delivery. And there's a scenario 4 in this paper. And I think we should think of the other is this with coalitions of the willing, more flexibility, differentiated integration. But we should think in this case, when we talk about the Green Deal, we should think indeed about or we should see this is a priority of the European Union. And this means we have to be efficient in this policy field. And we have to close the gap between promise, the political promise of the Green Deal, and delivery. And this is the big challenge, I think, right now to the European Green Deal in time of the Corona crisis. And therefore, I'm a little bit afraid that we miss this great opportunity for the future and future generations if we don't put it in more concrete terms, the whole European Green Deal. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that we are working on that. But proposals of the Commission do not mean that all member states will decide on that. And therefore, I'm really glad that the German presidency is putting the European Green Deal as, or describes it as one of the priorities. I think this is very important. But this means to put it in more concrete terms, and this is the first step, as I mentioned already, in the 8th Environmental Action Programme. And this is then an agreed basis. The European Green Deal is just a proposal of the Commission, and we have to get into all the member states into the boat to take them all on board, and this can be done, or at least a majority on board, by the 8th Environmental Action Programme. And then we have a program for legislation. But then we come to another challenge, and this is implementation and enforcement. And this in this regard, I mentioned Article 11, we need this monitoring inside the European institutions. My proposal addressed this, but we need this as well on the member states level. And in this regard, the Green Deal mentioned, indeed, the communication on the European Green Deal mentioned that the European Commission wants to support member states in implementation, and this means as well in implementation on environmental policy, climate protection, and things like that. So what is really important that we help member states to build up governance structures to deliver on the agreed legislation, on the objectives. Because otherwise, if we don't close this gap between promise and delivery, I think we will lose citizens. Yeah, citizens don't trust anymore in politics, and especially then in the European Union anymore, if there's another promise. And when I think back to the elections, there was a promise to European citizens on climate protection, on a European Green Deal. And now this is the reason why it's so important to deliver now really as well on implementation. And this is the reason why we need this monitoring structures, and we need maybe support regarding member states, for example, to build up more effective institutions, more effective public administration. We can use the money we have in the from the recovery plan as well, to build up better governance structures in the member states, I think. Let's think about this as well. Because the law in the books does not mean that we have already law in action. I think this is very important to, that we, in order to close this gap between promise and delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karris. I think this was a very apt conclusion too. Allow me also to hark back to what a great German political scientist almost 100 years ago said. You know, if rule, or now they speak, you would say governance. If governance fails to achieve its objectives, but continues to put out new objectives, it becomes ridiculous. That's how Wilhelm, I'm paraphrasing Wilhelm Hennis on this. I think we have touched upon some very, very important points. The good thing is TEPSA and all the research institutes will watch with eagle eyes what happens during the German presidency. There's a lot of hopes, a lot of pressure in these very special times, of course, piling up. Allow me to thank all of you for your participation, your questions, and your interest in the topic. And I hope some of you might even find the time to also look into the one or the other panel tomorrow when we continue. Other than that, I wish you all a very good evening. Keep safe, and some of you enjoy straddling in the French Alps from tomorrow onwards, as I know. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the technical.
Bye. Bye.